So as Tony said, my name is Emma Arnaz Pemberton. I work for a company called Wellington. We're a project management firm based in Windsor here in the UK. We also have offices in Spain, in Madrid and in Ireland, and partners in Costa Rica, kind of helping us to spread the PMO word across Latin and South America. Tony has already done an amazing introduction, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide. So I'm very involved with the different associations for project management across the world. I am the Director of Consulting Services at Wellington, so that means that I get to spend a lot of time setting up and transforming PMOs. I also look after sustainability and corporate social responsibility. So that means I get to work with some amazing organizations that are trying to bring project management and change and projects together with social good. And I also run a conference for PMO people. So PMO professionals out there, head over to Future PMO. We run that conference every year in London. And it's a super safe space, really friendly event, no sales, so no one's trying to sell you anything. So it does make it a very different kind of event. At Wellington, I founded our Wellington PMO Academy. So we have an academy of courses for PMO and project management professionals. And some of the content that we're going to talk about today comes from some of those courses and the services and the experiences that I have working with some award-winning clients. So we're going to talk a little bit about a lot of things today. So we're going to go on a journey to the future of PMO. We're going to look at what organizational maturity will look like and how we will get there as PMOs. So we're going to talk a little bit about leadership, responsibility, the PMO's role in all of that, so that we can really help our organizations move towards the future. So as I said, we're going to talk a little bit about a lot. We're going to start off with leadership. We're going to talk about innovation and maybe giving you a different perspective on areas that your PMO can innovate. We're going to talk a little bit about skills and learning. We're going to talk on sustainability and the concept of responsible project management, as well as the role of the PMO in all of that, and then how we can get to a maturity with a roadmap that's going to help us to get there. As I totally said, I am happy to take questions at the end, so feel free to pop them in the chat or save them, and hopefully we can have a little bit of a chat afterwards. So let's start with the concept of leadership. The work economy and the COVID-19 pandemic has really forced us to take a long, hard look at how we lead. If we think about what a leader does, they inspire us, they bring us into a better, safer, more fulfilling environment. They remain confident and cool-headed, giving us confidence that everything's going to be okay. And they always seem to maintain a really positive attitude. They lead by example. They are apparently super productive, impossibly productive in some cases. And they'll be honest and loyal and fair and really focused on lifting people rather than lifting themselves using other people. And one of the key things is being a skilled listener. And like I said, when the pandemic hit, we all started working from home, and many leaders found it difficult to lead from afar. And that has really forced leadership as a topic to change. I'm sure many of you have been managed using some of these techniques. The feedback sandwich was used to provide a tool for leaders to provide negative feedback whilst protecting the feelings of the individual. That approach not only depersonalizes the interaction because it's well known, but provides a perspective that the leader has to find 2 positive things to say about you. Also, the carrot and stick approach to motivation, it doesn't really work, especially in work that is complex, that requires creativity or involves problem solving. These traditional short-term motivators really reduce creativity and actually foster very short-term thinking at the expense of long-term results. They actually remove intrinsic motivation. They diminish performance, they crush creativity, and they crowd out good behavior. Nowadays, now that we are doing a lot of leading from afar and we are having to lead in a different way, we expect more from our leaders. As the previous slide, we expect authentic leadership now. Authentic executives are more accessible. They're more relatable to their employees so that everybody at all levels feels comfortable sharing new ideas. They show a true passion for company success and create a family-like culture almost. The fastest growing leadership style is that of the coach and the mentor. These executives are starting to lift employees up by providing them tools for success. And as a result, there is a constant flow of learning and doing, trying and growing. Appreciation and respect are traits that all employees share for one another because of the creative culture that exists in that office, virtual or physical. And we can see that the hashtag Human First movement is well underway, with practitioners working towards this new style of leadership. I myself, I'm an NLP and mindfulness master practitioner, so I do that to support the teams I work with better, to make sure that they become what they want to become in the future, not just for one person, but for the collective good. So leadership has fundamentally changed. And one of the key areas for development is to make sure that our leaders are ready for that. Some have really struggled to lead from afar. Some have found it easier to transition, maybe because of their own personal traits. But it's important that we do actually consider, are we ready to lead from afar as a PMO team? When we look at innovation, we think about brand new things that need to be developed and idealized. If we look at some of the data from different sources, we can see that 20% of organizations encourage and reward creativity and new ideas. That's not a very high number, where people are actually given the time and the headspace to create something new. But 78% of business leaders believe that innovation is necessary for business success. And as a PMO, sometimes it's quite hard to think about areas to innovate. Where on earth could we make something brand new? And sometimes it isn't about making things brand new, but taking a different perspective. It's not about inventing new ways to do project management or governance processes or assurance, but instead thinking differently about how we engage our project management customers, making positive relationships and working in a smarter way. So here we have 5 areas that we might start thinking about where our PMO can actually innovate, that maybe steps away from the traditional, well, we must just update the process. We must just update the templates. First of all, is around our community, our network. It's around making sure that we're looking at our organization and our community of practice and providing opportunities to share knowledge, to identify new knowledge and collectively learn. It's about collaborating. So it isn't just the PMO working in its own way, developing what it thinks its internal customers need. It's really about levering that community to collaborate towards the future. The next area is around capability, and not something that some PMOs still don't really think about that much. But we're asking people to work in a completely different way to how they did before. And just because we've been doing this virtual thing for a couple of years now, doesn't mean that everybody's having a positive and enriching experience every day. So we need to think about, how do we help people to be confident in this way of working? So thinking about things like project-based learning, giving people training and support, but then giving them the time and the space to be able to go and practice that. Thinking about doing some reflective practice. As professional PMO adults, we're not great at sitting back and just taking stock. We're always busy, we're always looking for the solution. But doing some reflective practice and developing our critical thinking skills and encouraging that within our community is a really good way to start to bring that collaborative culture into the PMO space. We also need to look at our governance. How have we decided to run our projects? How do things get approved? Thinking about the last couple of years, a lot of projects have continued to deliver without a lot of the governance touch points. So does that mean that we need to put them all back? Or could we take a slightly different perspective and approach and look at our governance with some pragmatism now? Look at how we categorize and how we prioritize our projects to identify maybe different levels of governance, maybe different styles of governance, so that we can actually use the right tools to manage the right projects. Standards. We're always going to talk about standards when we talk about PMO, just as much as we're always going to talk about governance. But again, projects have continued to deliver without everything they had before. So can we review our standards and make it scalable so that different versions can be used for different projects? Can we make it simpler? Now that people are working from afar, it's harder for people to take in big pieces of information. So simplifying where we can, making it clear, making things accessible, chunking things up for people so they make logical sense when they go to find something is a really important way for us to innovate in that kind of collaborative space, whether that's an intranet or a hub or a team or a channel, whatever it might be. Actually taking a view on how we store, how we communicate, how we educate all of our standards is going to be really important moving forward. And lastly, it's around networking, really making sure that we're building partnerships, both internal and external to our organization. The world is moving very quickly. Technology is enabling that hugely. So understanding where we are in terms of our performance next to other people, other organizations, maybe in our industry, maybe outside of our industry, creating partnerships so that we can bring an external point of view out from the wider industry and into our organizations, and maybe starting to negotiate with some of the other teams within our businesses who can actually help us to do this. So in terms of innovation, we need to stop thinking solely about processes and templates. We need to think wider than that. We need to think about what's going to make sure that we build positive relationships in largely a virtual way, which is harder to do anyway. But we do that through community, through capability, through the right approach to governance and standards, and through networking and sharing our story, as well as getting others to share theirs. One of the key things that we've talked about there is about capability and learning. Now, it was really interesting to look at some of the research that has come out over the last couple of years around how people want to work and how people want to learn. We know that more than 70% of people would consider a change to more flexible working in the future, so that we aren't tied to the desk from 9 till 5 or whatever hours we end up doing. We also know that virtual training has exploded, and that has led to opportunities like this for all of us to get together and discuss maybe new topics, explore new things, and have a conversation. It also came to light that actually virtual training in some ways helps us to retain more information. That's because virtual learning, people can go back and forth, they can try new things, whereas in a classroom, it's kind of a once and done situation. We saw online learning courses explode over the last few years. So people are bringing brand new skills that they didn't have before back into their PMOs. So if we look at the learning trends that we see at the moment, there are kind of 4 main ways to learn. The first is distance learning. This is good for long-term learning, where we need to take the time to do that, maybe within our own free space, but doing that at a distance. We have the concept of remote live. So remote live is where it's remote, but you have a real live trainer, maybe with a real live whiteboard. That's really good for live interaction. Virtual training is really good for your own time learning and working at your own pace. And classroom learning is really important for peer connectivity. And there are some different perspectives when we look at these trends. First of all, virtual learning. Really, really good for people wanting to learn at their own pace and do 30 minutes here and there. But we find that people finding motivation can be really hard for some learners. Not everybody gets to the end. For presentation-based training, it's a really good idea to do, and it allows us to demonstrate and view and see lots of information, but it can lead to a lack of interactivity. If we look at assessment-based training, this teaches us how to revise and encourages time management. but it has a lack of practical focus when we return to work. I'm sure some of you have been on a course at some point and then gone back to work and not really understood how to translate that into real life. Exercise-based works a little bit better around that because we can practice within a contained environment, thereby giving us confidence. But it can be difficult to assimilate that learning into real life and stepping out of that. So thinking about those deficits, the pros and cons, and specifically virtual training. One of the key questions that has come up over the last few months is corporate classroom training dead? Not necessarily. As we've said, we understand now that one of the key things of virtual learning is we can learn at our own pace. It's self-initiated, so we're immediately in a position where somebody has chosen to do that. They're not being put in that room, which is a huge positive for them. And also it brings skills diversity back into the PMO. It's fascinating, and the reason I love my job working with PMOs is because every PMO is different. And that's because every PMO is effectively built by the people that's within the team. I'm very interested in the human condition. So all of my PMOs always have a really strong coaching and mentoring facility. In other areas, we have people who have gone out and they've learned about risk management. So we have a really good risk escalation and support process in place. So based on what people have taken the time to learn, will bring a variety of different skills that maybe we wouldn't have had before. However, we do need to consider the learning loss, the ability for people to do two things at once, so they can check their email, they can just click through screens, so that we actually don't take away as much as we would do if we were in a classroom. Also, we need to be very mindful and careful of the quality of remote learning. Throughout the last 2 years, we've seen 400% explosion in the online learning courses, people doing them and people creating them. And we need to be very careful as organizations and as teams who are enabling capability to make sure that we're validating how good that training is, that it isn't someone's opinion, that it is actually going to bring some return on investment. And the other issue with virtual training is that there is no direct instruction. There is no direct validation of your learning. So we need to be, again, mindful of when we are selecting training for people, when we're selecting programs for people to go to, is how we're going to understand if they've actually learned and taken that away from the training, or have we just created badge collectors who we're just collecting all the badges, but we're not able to actually turn those badges into something tangible, both for the individual and for the business. Some of the learning deficits that we tend to see that we need to consider, first of all, is the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. I'm sure some of you have seen this, but within an hour of leaving a training session, about half of everything you've heard and learned will fall out of your head. That's just the rule. And over time, we have less and less that we actually retain actively. So although it is possible then to start applying some of that, some of the problem is that we don't fully remember. And with online training, as well as some other trainings, we don't have an opportunity to go back and ask again. We also need to be very mindful of the theory versus the reality. Lots of learning opportunities out there are based on theory. That theory assumes that our reality has all the time, resources, money, and the ability to stop everything else while we create something. That isn't most people's reality. So we need to be very clear as to what the expectation is when people come back to the business. Also, if some of our courses might be very exam focused, is that the focus? Is that what we want people to learn, is how to pass an exam? Or is there some practical application before, during, and after that these courses can really help for our people to bring that return on investment? As PMOs, quite often we are selecting training programs and we need to focus on this return on investment. We wouldn't do a project if it wasn't going to give us a benefit. So we need to be very mindful of the same when we look at how we are going to enable capability moving forward. One of the things that works for many organizations is the concept of project-based learning. Project-based learning is where we do training, and then after the course, people go and run a project. They actually go and they bring change to their organization. It's a really good way of doing the follow-on from training, because it's public. So it means that people are a little bit more conscious a bit more present, we could say, within the training itself, because they publicly will have to go out and change something and use those skills. It gives us that tangible benefit as a team, as an organization, of we invested this time in this person and they've actually bringing a change straight away. We're going to see that. It's going to be obvious. It makes people accountable, because it's not just them going on a course, coming back and doing things at their desk. They have to come back and actually apply something. It helps them to translate the theory into real practice in their organizations with peer-to-peer support, and in some cases, actual professional mentoring, so that they can genuinely bring that return on investment back to the business. It also encourages critical thinking and reflective practice, two things that we're not very good at as professional PMO people. We tend to go into solution mode as soon as we find a problem. What we need to do is really think about, where is this problem coming from? Is that something that we need to change? Is it something that's in our control or outside of our control? And project-based learning, is the fundamentals around reflective practice, is around coming back around and understanding, how did that go? What did I really take away from that? Was I able to apply everything exactly how the book said? Or have I had to take a slightly different course? Slightly different course is fine. It isn't about changing the world necessarily, but it is about bringing back true skills into the organization. Talking of skills, it's important that we look at the skills that PMOs will need, as well as project management professionals, and consider the concept of leadership, business, technical, and everything else. In relatively recent research, we found that actually, although the technical skills from a project management PMO perspective are still really important, we can see that leadership skills are quickly catching up on the importance of technical skills. This is from the PMI's Pulse of the Profession. We need to consider that next to what we do as a PMO. We can see here business skills. The business acumen, being able to navigate our political landscape, is one of the core skills that we need in the PMO space. Sometimes we're going into a room and giving good news. Other times, not so much. Other times we might be influencing or supporting people through a difficult situation. So really thinking about, from a project management to PMO transition, how do we develop those skills? In terms of those skill sets that we're going to need for the future, we need to think about that in a PMO context. What does that actually mean? That actually means that we are going to see disruption of PMO and project management, really looking at what is the service offering? How do we decide what skills we need versus what skills and services our PMO needs to bring to our organizations? We need to be very mindful that we can't build a service offering based on what we think. We need to understand what our internal customers need, our PMO customers need, and develop our service offering so that it will really help them to get to the future. It will enable them to really get to that end goal. We also need to consider the operating environment that we work within. Self-awareness, what are the external factors and trends, things that we need to avoid versus exploit? Are there changes in attitudes? We need to think about the project economy. Individuals working in project-based roles are expected to increase by 2027 from 66 to 88 million. That's a huge professionalization of our industry. Looking at that operating environment and thinking about our delivery frameworks. Can we fix broken things? Can we take a pragmatic view? So really thinking around the complexity that drives our operating environment for a PMO, and how we connect the innovation with the learning, with the skills, with the future of our organizations. Passing the acid test virtually is really interesting. This is around, do people pick up the phone when the PMO calls? Do they know who we are and what we do? That becomes more difficult virtually. We need to get better at community, at letting people know who we are, what we do, and what we bring to the table. We also need to consider that technology and transformation aspect. Technology has exploded. So it is having a huge impact on the way that we want to work. So we need to be adaptable. We need to be able to support repeatable processes. We need to enable ourselves with technology that helps us to do that, and consider that transformational change moving forward. How do we keep up as well as keep doing what we need to do? And lastly, and arguably the most important, is around that team and community element. Are we doing enough social collaboration, harnessing the hive mind and engaging informal project managers as well as professional project managers? Do we understand how to build relationships, who our stakeholders are, what they actually want, who our wider team is? We need to also think about moving projects forward and making stakeholders keep coming back to help us embed the PMO, making sure that we are showing authentic leadership, working with transparency, making sure we have succession planning in place, making sure we are driving that culture of change. And we can only do that with the right skills, which include those technical skills we saw, which include leadership skills, but also they include the business skills that we maybe don't have right now at the forefront of our mind. In terms of future skills, this is a view of our competence framework at Wellington that we use to do coaching. And we can see that we have the delivery skills, those technical skills for project management within the PMO space. It is very important to understand how to manage our life cycles, how to do governance and assurance, how to run quality, how to develop the frameworks and methodologies. But really quickly coming behind, as we saw, are those business skills, those leadership and business skills. So we need to lift ourselves from the concept of delivery and look at strategic competencies. Do we have the business acumen that we need in order to navigate the political landscape of our organization? Can we think strategically about the whole system, not just that one process? Can we harness the knowledge that sits within our project teams? And then as individuals, we also need to look at our own skills, emotional intelligence, our ability to work independently, how we build and manage relationships. So in terms of skills, the world is shifting from project technical skills we need to understand to leadership and then business skills. So we need to be ready for that as PMOs. We need to get ourselves ready so that we can then support our teams, our project teams, so that they can actually keep up with that pace of change. So we've talked about how leadership has changed and how that impacts the way that we innovate in PMO. And we've talked about learning and skills, all really important things for the individuals. What we now will do is just talk briefly around sustainability and what this means for you and your PMO and your organization. We know that sustainability is one of the core focuses for most organizations out there. We have the Sustainable Development Goals that many organizations are aligning to and trying to work towards. In project management, we see that through some of the projects that exist and that are organizations. So, making sure that we are looking at how we have a relationship with the natural world, how we make sure that we are future-proofing future generations through the right projects to develop more sustainable farming, more sustainable cities. From an organizational perspective, that sounds really holistic, but there are things that we can definitely do. We can look at our strategy so that we can make sure that we put sustainability at the heart of what we do. We can look at the technology that we're using, that has been one of the real positives, is the amount of travel that people used to do has reduced substantially. So we're already having an impact, and it's about seeing that and continuing on that path. Also around reporting and making sure that we are including the concept of people, profit, and planet, as well as our traditional time, cost, and quality type metrics. Looking at waste and how, if we are in the office, how we manage that waste, as well as return on investment. Sustainable decisions often cost more than non-sustainable decisions, and that's something that we need as organizations to accept. But as a PMO and as an individual, sometimes we can't influence our organization that much or our clients that much if we are in the contracting space. There's only so much conversation we can have about developing an organizational strategy with sustainability at heart. And this is where we start thinking about, okay, as an individual, what can I do? So COVID has really highlighted the link between projects in society, projects in their economy, and projects in the natural world. As a result, one would say that the natural world has been not forgotten, but the focus has shifted, rightly so in some cases, to the others. However, there's a real risk there that we need to place our projects within their economy, within their society, as well as within the natural world. And that link is absolutely key with that sustainability triangle of people, profit, and planet. So there's an organization who are bringing companies together to help their clients, their customers, to make more sustainable decisions. And one of the key things is around the individual project managers. What can you do as a PMO person or a project manager, a project professional, to really help in this fight? And it's interesting because when we talk about sustainability, it sounds really high level and it sounds impossible for us to find a way to actually be involved as an individual. It can be very absolutist. But when we switch sustainable project management with responsible project management, now we start to see that there are things that we can do. So having the right people involved in the projects from our organization, from those teams that are working to be a bit more sustainable. It's really about thinking about what we could do versus what we should do. And we're not measured by it, but we choose to adopt the principles of responsible project management. And there are things that we can do. We can look at our project lifecycle and think about, as a PMO, how can we make this more responsible? If we think about the role of a project manager, they're designed and in place to complete the project and effectively remove themselves from the situation. What we should be doing is using the extended project lifecycle to increase the opportunities for longer term benefits and considerations. So really making sure that as the project manager steps away, that we have something in place to be able to really monitor what's going on, making sure that we remain in that space of responsible project management. Then when we look at development skills, we need to consider the importance of professionalization, noting that different cultures will have a different approach. But when we think about project management, in the grand scheme of things, it's relatively recently that it was professionalized. Before PMO, the project managers delivered projects, and before project managers, stuff got done. It's kind of the same in the sustainability space. There are no certificates right now focused on responsible or sustainable project management, but there are indicators that are being championed in a big way by the movements such as Responsible PM, making sure that we expand curriculums in education to engage people with communities and demonstrate their capabilities in responsible project management. That leads us to career growth. If we look at jobs being advertised, what do they ask for in terms of competencies? Do they ask for an IPMA level C, or do they look for a reliable signal on the individual, how much community work they do, how they get involved with their local charities? As prospective employers and people building PMO teams, we need to start validating someone's responsibility, level of responsibility, by validating their experiences in the project context. We also need to be more value-driven. We choose to be responsible project managers, but we don't show how we live our values enough. Check out your CV. Is it looking backwards instead of showcasing your purpose, your ambition? And then we have to consider the influencing power that we have. Not all project managers can influence an organization to make sustainable choices. Construction and industries such as that give the biggest opportunity to do this. But there are other things organizations can do, such as the use of recycled materials, providing advice to their clients on the best choices. And project managers should understand that organizations sign up to initiatives very contextually, but few of them actually know how to truly follow up with those actions. And there's work going on there too, help for education providers, competency support, and even organizational help to support leaders know how to live their values. In terms of practical things that we can do, these are some of the changes that we've made for our training. We used to do all of our training academy courses face-to-face. That changed. So there are things that we did to make sure that we could be responsible, more responsible and sustainable than just switching everything to virtual, because there has to be a balance between value for money and the experience that the individuals are going to get. So we changed our strategy. We went virtual with an option of classroom. So we encouraged to reduce that travel time. We went through the concept of remote live, where people aren't just left to their own devices. They have a trainer, they have a real live whiteboard, and we actually have real interaction with people. So it still starts to feel more like a training session than just somebody talking over some slides. We looked at the timings. There are things you can do to be more responsible, to give people a better opportunity to learn and share. Don't try and do full day meetings. Split them into a bunch of different modules. We implemented more mentoring so that everybody that goes through our courses has the ability of a mentor. They have access to a mentor after for as long as they need. We talked about material and the impact of having material being printed and sent. So we switched to recyclable materials. The reason for that is because we didn't want to do everything just virtually. It's really hard if you don't have 3 screens to do all of that in a training session. And then also it just feels like a very long meeting, not so much a training session. And within that training material, people get some treats. That means that straight away the ice is broken and people are able to chat about something they have in common. And the important thing, if you're going to start changing your strategy and the way that you approach your work as a PMO, is to do pilots and get feedback and understand what your PMO customers are saying. You as an individual, your responsibility, only you can choose to be a responsible project manager. It's about winning hearts, not just minds. It isn't just about using recycled paper. Responsibility is much wider than that. We need to not think though about, oh, well, it's just more stuff that we have to do, because you're probably already doing some of it. And there are spaces for you to explore this a little bit more. And in terms of you're already doing some of this, chances are you're already trying to be a little bit more responsible at home. You're probably already switching lights off. You're probably already using some recycled, getting rid of single-use plastic. So it's a good example for your family, but we should be applying that as individuals to our work as well. So thinking about not sustainability, because there's only so much we can do necessarily, but thinking about being responsible and making responsible choices for ourselves and for our teams, and encouraging that within our project teams. So in all of this, we've talked about people, we've talked about the future and things we need to consider. We need to now look at the future of PMO. We did a networking event not that long ago, and we asked about what does your future PMO look like? And this is all the things that came out of it. So people felt that PMOs needed to be more adaptive. They need to have more agility in the way that they work, more proactive, really focused on adding value, focused on people being respected, being resilient, being dynamic, strengthening tools, So really thinking about what the future might look like. And I do wonder how many of these words make you think of your future PMO. We translate that into strategy, delivery, and capability. And we refer to our competence framework to do this, which you saw earlier. And looking really at that strategic side, again, do they answer the phone, the virtual phone, the Teams call? If you call, do they know where to come for help, all of your customers? Also considering stakeholder management. Is your leadership's behavior understood? Do we have enough emotional intelligence in the team to be able to manage the different personalities, giving them everything they think they want? And remembering that stressors come in all shapes and sizes, much more than before now. We need to be aware of our and our colleagues' surroundings. Are they all having an enriching and fruitful conversation all day? No, the answer is no. So check the environment before deciding what you need to do next. From a delivery perspective, maturity has been a really popular conversation over the last couple of years, with organizations taking the time to take stock of their situation. I've spent lots of time supporting people in assessing their maturity. So it's really important to engage with formal and informal project managers and to have an open mindset. Make it a two-way conversation, not communication. No one likes to feel like something's being imposed on them. So it's a great chance, if you haven't already, to start building that community. We're all craving it, after all. And be clear about, you need to champion the change. So think about all of those areas of innovation. Think about the journey. Think about the roadmap before deciding what to do next. And lastly, capability. We need to walk the walk, talk the talk, as far as being feedback, as getting feedback, and being brave when you get some feedback back. Reflect on whether your team recognize your identity. Do your customers understand the PMO's purpose and the journey? Are they supported? Make sure that everybody has a similar experience. It might not always be a positive one, but we need to empathize with that and understand why that is. And we're back to what I mentioned earlier around the human first approach. Remember that we need to talk to the humans before we talk to the project managers or the PMO people. We are much more than our processes with the PMO. Remember that we are 100% connected these days, but on a human level, we're actually very disconnected. Remember that data doesn't equal intelligence just yet. We're not going to talk about AI today. And remember that community is absolutely key for what you want to do. And all of this culminates in your maturity and your roadmap. When we talk about PMO maturity, we talk about it at 3 different levels. It can mean different things. At operational level, it can mean about keeping the lights on and making sure that we can react to situations. Whereas at that enterprise level, it might be about getting that perspective and understanding what decisions we are making. At the strategic level, it might be all about the next 10 years. So we need to be mindful that maturity means different things to different people. And we can see that 64%, according to our research, of PMOs believe that they're operating at a level 2 or 3 out of 5. And only 30% of PMOs are actually satisfied with that. They want to do more. And the perception of PMO is moving in the right direction. So as you think about building your roadmap for your PMO, first of all, you need to consider, what is the vision? Why are you trying to do this now? What are you trying to achieve? What's the opportunity you're trying to lever? Where are you today? You can't build a roadmap without understanding what your starting position is. We can all say we want to get to 100%, but if our starting position is 0, you'd be happy with 30. So understand where you are. Then understand where you want to be. It isn't all about getting to the top level every time. One of my big lessons in life is that sometimes just enough is just enough. And so it's understanding what is enough for our organization. Next, how are you going to get there? What will your roadmap look like? What are the key things that you need to deliver in order to be able to get to that goal? And lastly, how did you do? How well did you actually get on? And did you follow that? So closing the loop all the way around. Maturity comes from combining 3 key questions. 1, what do your customers think you should be doing? What direction and theory is at your disposal? And what is actually really happening? When I do maturity, we look at it from kind of 3 different perspectives in terms of from a benefits viewpoint. And from a strategic perspective, we often see a prominent return on investment because they have signed up to something. They've signed up to the roadmap. They know what the next bit of path is, and everybody's on the same page. We also see a lot more efficiencies with the delivery teams because, again, they're all talking the same language. They're all driving towards the same outcome. And it automatically seems to bring much better knowledge management and reduced waste. From a capability perspective, we've made a strategic decision once we have a roadmap to focus on project management as a discipline, and that helps us to attract and retain a quality workforce. There are different maturity levels out there. There's a few written down here. There are more. I'm not trying to sell anything, but you can see that there are different ways of measuring maturity. Across all of the different theories of maturity, they're usually around 5 levels. So in this example, we have initial, where we have an awareness of the need for better project management, but we don't really do anything outside of a few individuals. At defined level, this is where our processes are documented and repeatable, but we don't apply it across the board. At the standardized level, everything's utilized consistently at an organizational level, whereas at managed, we're now starting to get into that area of collecting and analyzing data, so really focus more on performance. And at level 5, this is now when we're in a continuous improvement loop. So really making sure that we have that view of where do we want to get. And just to finish today, this is a really important part of this, the culmination of all of this is around the roadmap. Firstly, you need to reflect on where you are and where you want to be. Then you need to design the blueprint, the roadmap for the future, the postcard of the future to bring people along on the journey. Make sure that in your roadmap, you build accountability. So you publish the plan, you make it obvious, you make it clear what it is you're trying to achieve as a PMO. Then you need to make sure that you're capable of delivering that roadmap, really making sure that you have the right skills within the team, and if you haven't, that you can get them. And then lastly is closing that loop and making sure you constantly review to see that you've achieved what you wanted to achieve. A roadmap doesn't have to be a very complicated, large document, as long as you've considered all of these things before you start building it. I hope you found today useful, and it's given you a few maybe different perspectives on things to consider when building a PMO. You can stay in touch with me. You can find me on all the social media networks, and you have my email address and contact information there. And while we open up the chat and we see if we do have any questions, just for fun, this is something that you can do on our conference website. If you go to futurepmo.com, you can answer a little quiz. It's just for fun, and it will tell you what arcade machine your PMO is most like. And there are lots of companion articles on there with some hints and tips on how to get your PMO to a different level. So thank you very much. I'm going to see if we've got any questions in the chat. Let's have a look. Is it good to set PMO in organizations which have little projects in their portfolios? This is from Venushti. I hope I've said that right. Yes, there's a risk and reward thing always with setting up a PMO. And funnily enough, I was talking about this morning in a training course where we said, is there always a need for PMO? The answer is no, there isn't always a need for it. And it really depends on a number of factors. Firstly, how complex are those projects? It could be that we have a few projects, but they are quite complex. So they actually need some governance and some control and some oversight. And that's okay. The key for me is to understand if that requires a team, a PMO team, or if that requires some of the PMO responsibilities to actually happen. What we tend to find in organizations with smaller portfolios is that it doesn't warrant the expense to set up a team. what those organizations then tend to do is they actually have the responsibilities of a PMO, but they're dotted around the business. So there'll be somebody in finance that does the project accounting. There'll be somebody in audit or operations that does quality assurance for projects. There'll be someone in the leadership team who kind of owns a bit of a portfolio view of everything. So it doesn't have to be a PMO every time. The important thing is that the response, if we're running projects, is that those responsibilities are taken care of. So hopefully that's helped you, Vanushti. Aaron, there is a similarity between CMM and PPM maturity models. They all tend to have 5 levels, and although they're provided by different bodies, they are all relatively similar in the way that they are looking at organizationally, how do we do certain things, and they will always be able to break it into project, program, and portfolio. So there is a similarity, albeit they are different, and it will depend on where your organization is, what association it's obviously aligned to as well, will probably drive a lot of the decision as to which model to go down. So yes, you're right, there are some similarities. Next one is from Ashish. So organizations try to push existing PMOs to change to agile from waterfall without analyzing the actual need or impact it would make. My thoughts. That is very insightful, Ashish. You are absolutely right. I spend a relative amount of time with senior leaders who tell me we have to be agile. What we tend to do nowadays is we run a bit of a workshop. We actually educate them, first of all, as to what is agile, when it's the right thing to do, when it's not the right thing to do, and then help them to take a real view as to whether that is the right solution. One of the misconceptions of agile is that, well, everything will be quicker and we don't have to write as much down. That's not what agile is. It's a development methodology originally created for software development. In that sense, we're not ever going to be able to use it for everything. However, it isn't an us and them. We can use some of the practices that exist within Scrum or the SDM or Crystal or whatever version of Agile, and make sure that we at least are understanding of what the different teams maybe in our organization, some of who need to work in that way, actually need from the PMO. So we need to take a view, and in our own internal innovation is to A, understand the version of Agile that we're using, B, make sure that we can work alongside that team, that we understand the differences that we're going to see in terms of information coming in and out of that team, but also understand that actually it wouldn't kill us as traditional, if you like, waterfall PMOs to use some of those principles ourselves. There are things that we can do in an agile way. It wouldn't kill us to have a stand-up meeting every day and speak to our colleagues. It wouldn't kill us to be more visual in the way that we do things. And so I think there is a real, I think it is reducing. It used to be very much it's one or the other. I think what most organizations and PMOs get to now is a kind of hybrid model, because there are certain things that we need in terms of control as organizations, as businesses trying to make money, hopefully. So I think we end up with a bit of a mix of agile, waterfall, maybe throwing in some other methodologies in there as well. We've all maybe been exposed to Lean or Six Sigma or change management. So it isn't even just about the two anymore. There's actually more methodologies that we also need to bring into play. And in a Scrum, the last question is from Aaron. In a Scrum Agile delivery, where is the PMO placed? Well, that depends on your organization and how far you've taken the Agile conversation, particularly, well, not particularly, but in Scrum within your example. So there are certain things that the PMO shouldn't be involved in, like, for example, the retrospectives, but they can be involved from making sure they're present during the demos, during some of the planning as well. And it's about a bit of a negotiation between what do we need as PMOs in order to do our job, what's kind of the minimum standard that we need, and come into an agreement with the Agile team so that we can be present in some of their ceremonies and some of their work, so that we can see what's going on, but also that it comes the other way as well. So I think PMO is not placed within the Scrum or Agile framework as a project manager, doesn't exist in that same sense. But most organizations still need both of those roles. So it's about negotiating and coming to a conclusion within that almost hybrid model that allows the PMO and the project manager potentially to be involved in certain key areas. And I think that's all the questions that we have. I think there's a couple of technical ones. Sitolu, I think you are going to publish the recording. I think you've just put that, but it might just be worth you mentioning, as that's kind of the last question that we have.
Yes, Emma,
Yes,
this
we
is
will
Rahul.
do that.
Sorry.
Yes,
Sorry,
Rahul.
Satya.
Actually, Rahul had his hand up to ask a question, so I just unmuted him. So yeah,
Yeah.
please go
Yeah.
ahead to ask your question.
Sorry,
Thank you,
Rahul.
thank you, Satya. No, no worries, and thanks, Emma, for such a wonderful session. Yeah, so for this PMO space, and let's say about the new version of these PMOs when it comes to the Agile and Scrum. Nowadays, people are jumping from maturity model to maybe level 2 to maturity model 4, because what they are actually thinking that when it goes to Agile, they do not need a documentation much. So is it okay to carry that, or like because that's a vague statement that agile don't follow documentation, but whereas PMO actually the base itself that
Yeah.
we should have a documented process in place. So how and what should be done?
So the agile question can scare PMOs because, you know, how do we prioritize if we don't know what our benefits are going to be? And how do we know if an agile project is going wrong if we're not going to get the documentation we would normally get? So it can be quite scary for people.
Yeah.
So totally get your question. And I think, yeah, Aaron, I think that's kind of the same conversation based on your question as well. Agile doesn't say we're not going to do documentation. What it says is we value working software over comprehensive documentation. It doesn't say we're never going to do the documentation. What it says, what it implies, is that if it's going to take me as long to write the code as it is to write the documentation, I'm going to write the code first. But we're never going to be in a situation where the agile team's never going to document anything. Just from a support perspective, that's an impossibility. So, like I said, we need to kind of sit down, understand what our service offering is as a PMO. First of all, first big question is, do we understand how agile works? Because a lot of PMOs don't. They haven't actually gone to the lengths of learning and understanding why their IT teams are working in the way that they are. So that's where a lot of these preconceptions and perspectives come from that are sometimes incorrect. So we need to first of all understand agile ourselves. We need to then sit down with the people who are running their teams in a scrum or whatever type of agile way. And we need to sit down and go, okay, there are certain things that we need to provide assurance to the leadership. That's what our job is to manage 4 projects, making everybody there look good and making sure that we are providing confidence to the leadership. Without certain bits of information, we can't do that. So we need to work together, do that negotiation to understand what documentation can we get, what can we negotiate that you're still going to do for us, or what access can we be given if they don't want to do things like, I don't know, status reports as an example. Then actually, can we be in the room then instead? Can we be in the room when you're having these discussions so that we can then take away the information? The reality is the information is there, it's just in a different format effectively. So what we need to do is we need to work with those teams so that we can create a way of working that works for everybody. It's never going to be exactly the same as all the metrics we currently collect. It will be different. And that's okay as long as we understand why it's different and they understand why they need to do something in addition to.
Yeah,
the reality for most organizations is that they're not Spotify. They're never going to be 100% agile unless you're a software house and that's all you do. That the reality is we're not there. So straight away, we've already taken a step away from pure agile in many cases, and we've already probably taken a step away from pure Prince2 or PMP or whatever methodology, waterfall you want to use. The fact that we've already done that means that it's not a big deal if we sit down and discuss it and come up with a new approach that works for everybody. So it's about being brave and having that conversation, that negotiation upfront, to understand when agile should be used, when it shouldn't be used, and when it does need to be used, what can we get in return? A word of warning is that PMOs quite often, we get lost in data. It's like, I must collect as much data as I possibly can. And actually, to do our job, we don't need all that data. So also make sure you measure what's important. You don't make important what you can measure.
That's true, Emma. And again, that brought my the next question in my mind. Like, in my organization, like there are these dedicated PMOs and shared service PMOs. So shared service PMO, they are following the documentation, but whereas the dedicated ones, they just tick mark the thing that yes, they are not applicable, and then they are just bypassing the documentation, and they are getting the these brownie points on the maturity assessment matrix.
Yeah, because they don't need to. Yeah, I mean, I would be looking at the maturity assessment, because the maturity assessments, they're great, but they also need to be interpreted to the real world and to the real situation. So I would be making sure that, yeah, we're actually looking at that through real eyes, because that's all lovely, but the fact that both of those are working in a totally different way, straight away for me, those are warning signs.
Exactly. Yes,
So,
yes, yeah,
you know,
totally
that's a
agree.
warning sign. So straight away, I'd be asking for more evidence and finding out, okay, that looks lovely from one side, but we need to understand how we tie this up. Because one of the key things about all the maturity models is that to get to level 4, everything should be being used consistently, a version of, but it has to be an agreed version of. So they, you know, if one element is working at a 4, by definition, organizationally, you can't be if you're still down here, because that removes the consistency, which is one of the key magic terms, if you like, that we look for when it comes to maturity.
Yeah, true that. Yep. Thank you, Emma. Thank you for the wonderful answer also. Thank you.
Thank you for your questions. So Tulu, I'll hand over back to you.
All right. Okay, there is one more question here. I think we can make this as the last question for today, since we have a little less time. When you say maturity model, what model are you referring to?
So in my slides, there is a page that has a number of different maturities. So there are different ones out there. So I'm not referring to one specifically. I'm referring to kind of what's out there. They're all relatively similar. They all have 5 levels. They all kind of looking at similar things. From my perspective, one of the ones I use 2 specifically. I use our Wellington one, which is specifically engineered for PMOs. So we're looking at PMO maturity, not organizational. I am also a P3M3 assessor, so that's the Actalos tool. There's also CMMI, and there's the PMI version, there's the PMO Global Alliance version. There's a bunch of different maturity models, and like I said, that depending on where your company is aligned, it will make more sense to use one or the other. Depending on, like I say, if you're more PMI, then you're probably going to want to use that one versus, you know, in the UK, we have quite a lot of APM type stuff. So that's more drives us towards the Actalos. So there are various maturity models, but they are all very similar in terms of how they work and kind of how the levels work. It's just slight nuances depending on, like I say, where your organization is particularly aligned.